Hej och välkomna till avsnitt 1317 av Amerikanska nyhetsanalyser med mig Ronie Berggren. I mitten av april pålyste USAs president Joe Biden att han kommer att avsluta USAs krig i Afghanistan. Den 11 september 2021 ska de sista soldaterna ha tagits hem. I detta avsnitt samtalar jag med den amerikanske krigsveteranen Chris Reiff som berättar om sin tjänstgöring i Afghanistan och sina tankar kring att USA nu kommer att avsluta sitt längsta krig i historien. Varmt välkomna. Chris Reiff, welcome.
Thanks for having me on. Nice to talk to you.
Yeah, you have been deployed to Afghanistan and that war is winding down. President Biden has said that on September 11th, the war will end and this is the longest war in American history. And you have been in Afghanistan, served as a soldier there. Can you tell me a little bit before we go into that about your background, who you are and things like that?
My name's Chris Reiff. I did 6 years in the Army. I did a little over half a tour in Iraq, around 7 months or so in 2007. We came home, did a little time, training and doing some dwell time in Alaska I was with the 501st. And then we deployed to Afghanistan in 2009 for about a year. And then after that, I was sent to Fort Campbell, where I kind of just, finished off my contract. I had like a year and a half, 2 years left, and the unit was deployed when I got there. So I was just kind of on rear D after that. So after that, I got out of the Army. I went to college, got my degree in electrical engineering using the GI Bill. And now I work for a defense contractor as an electrical engineer.
All right. Very interesting. The United States has an all-voluntary army. What was the reasons for you joining the army?
So in high school, I was, at the time I was done with school and I kind of, I was always wanted to do something with the military. I was in, ROTC in high school and stuff. So, the military really just made sense to me. I wanted to, do my part, especially after 9/11 and, I had originally had signed up to join the Navy, but decided I wanted to be a little more hands-on and in the in the main, main action, I guess you should say. So I actually backed out of joining the Navy and just went straight up infantry with an airborne contract and just wanted to do my time, I guess.
Yeah, and your first deployment was Iraq. Can you tell me a little about that? How it was to enter a war zone, basically?
Yeah, so it was a little nerve-wracking, especially when you're coming in as a new guy, essentially. You're this brand new soldier who's only been out of basic training for 6 months or so, and you get to a unit, and this unit of guys has already been in country for 6 months or so, and they've been through hell. Essentially, they went through. They were in Fallujah for a while before I got there. They lost some people, and I was essentially a replacement, and it's kind of it was a pretty stressful experience, but the guys that I ended up with were fantastic, and I ended up fitting in. It wasn't a ended up being a great experience. I got pretty close with a lot of the guys there. So at first it was a little rough, but I I got used to it.
Yeah. Did you experience any, combat situations in Iraq? Well, and was that your first combat experience in that case?
Yeah, so there was a few troops in contact incidents that we were involved in, and that was definitely the first combat experience. It was definitely terrifying. One minute we were at this little outpost, and we were setting it up, and all of a sudden all hell breaks loose, and you just got everyone firing, and you see tracers flying around all over the place. You hear the 240, talking back and forth with the 50 cal, and um, it was definitely definitely hard to explain, that kind of situation, but it's definitely gets your adrenaline pumping.
Yeah, I can imagine. I've talked to others who have served in Iraq, and they said that one thing that defined the war in Iraq is that you never knew from which way the bullet came from. You didn't know in the beginning, at least, when a combat broke out. You didn't know where to look, or where the enemy was. Was that a common experience for you also?
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, you never really knew which direction you were going to get shot at from, and that also is true in Afghanistan as well.
Hmm.
You never knew whether you're gonna get shot from behind. You never knew whether the ground beneath you is gonna just explode randomly. Um, you never knew if an RPG was just gonna come flying at you as you're um, just going about your business. Even on the FOBs, the forward operating bases, you could be just, going to take a shower or something, and all of a sudden, a rocket um, hits somewhere on the fob. I remember I was asleep, or kind of half asleep, in my little can, and I heard this sound, and I was new at the time, and I didn't know what it was, but my roommate at the time, he had heard it, and I guess he was used to that sound, and he had taken off already. He was halfway out the door by the time I realized what was even going on.
Hmm.
Um, and what that sound I heard was the motor of a rocket, and that rocket hit the chow hall. Um, but fortunately, I think no one really was seriously injured because the rocket ended up hitting the giant AC unit. Uh, so we were a little inconvenienced because it blew up our chow hall, but I think everyone made it through okay.
Yeah, and after which year was this when you were in Iraq? Which year was it, like in
This
2000?
is 2007, and the area that we were in was in Fob Kalsu and Iskandaria area.
Okay, yeah. So after this, after your tour in Iraq, because we're gonna talk a little bit, in depth about Afghanistan. After that, you went home, or did you go to Afghanistan at once?
No, we went home because the army at the time required so many months of, they called it dwell time. So if you do a certain, you do 12 months deployment, then they want you to come home and be home for that same amount of time, or whatever it was. Um, so we did our dwell time. We would train. We would go to all the big time training centers. NTC, um, in Nevada, where we would do training to deploy essentially.
Yeah.
And then after um, after we did our essentially a year home, we ended up going right back. I think we deployed. It was January, I think, in 2009.
When you deployed to Afghanistan.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So how is it to, like, you have been in Iraq and you have experienced war, and I assume you have seen your friends being killed in Iraq. Was that the case?
So I actually didn't see anybody get seriously injured in Iraq. Um, Definitely a different story in Afghanistan. Um, but the guys in my unit, like I said, they lost some guys when they were in Fallujah. The area they were in Fallujah was a lot worse than where I ended up becoming a replacement in Iraq. So it kind of calmed down by the time I had gotten there. Even though we were still getting, we were still getting shot at, and we were still getting, you know, in firefights and stuff. But I didn't see anyone get seriously injured. There was a few IED strikes here and there, but um,
Oh.
fortunately, everyone was okay for my portion in Iraq.
Yeah, but the question I want to ask is if still you went home from Iraq, and I assume you have family and friends and things like that back home in the United States, and then you're gonna deploy again. How does that, when you have been to one war and then you're gonna be sent to another war, what does that do to your, like, your family, your friends, and things like that?
Oh yeah, they were terrified. They didn't even want me to join the army at all.
Hmm.
They were pushing me really, really hard to join the Navy, and in some sense, that's probably what pushed me to get out of the Navy.
Yeah, okay.
um, so kind of rebellious teenager type thing going on, but yeah, they were always really worried about me. You know, when you tell them, hey, I just joined the army, and then they're worried about you, of course. Then you're like, hey, oh, by the way, I'm going to Iraq in 6 months. Then it becomes very real for them, and then they sort of catch their breath once they realize you're home and you're safe after your deployment, and you made it through. And then a year later, you tell them, oh, hey, by the way, going to Afghanistan, and it's like they get that anxiety all over again.
Yeah, but did you have the choice to say no to Afghanistan, or is it like you get the contract and after you sign it, then the military can send you, basically wherever they want? Is that the case, or did you have the option to say no to Afghanistan?
No,
Then
you can't say no. Essentially, it's whatever unit you end up with. When they get slotted, that's where you're going.
okay, yeah,
Um, yeah, so there's really no opt out
okay.
option.
Okay. So can you tell me then, you went to Afghanistan. How was it when you landed in Afghanistan? What was your thought and your feelings, and what did you see? What country did you come to? Because, when you arrived to Afghanistan, the United States had been there like almost 10 years, and, trying to, to make that nation work. What did you see when you landed in Afghanistan the first time?
So we ended up coming in from Kuwait, which we also did the same thing for Iraq. Kuwait was kind of like the jump off point to the different theaters, essentially. But the biggest thing for me when I got to Afghanistan was it was really cold. I think there was some light snow when I got there. The other thing that kind of took me by surprise was when I had landed, and it was I landed at Bagram. It's like the main U.S. base there. It's absolutely huge. But I remember seeing minefields that were all cordoned off, and those minefields were left over from when the Russians were there. That's one of the things that really I wouldn't say caught me by surprise, but because I knew the Russians were there. A lot of countries have been there, but one of the things that really I thought was interesting was how much of that footprint you could still see all over the place in Afghanistan. Like there's, you see um, Russian, alphabet everywhere. You see minefields. You see old destroyed, BMPs and all kinds of, uh, uh, military vehicles from, artillery pieces, all kinds of stuff just left over from the Russians.
Hmm. Yeah, and so your start point became the background base, and after that, were you sent? Because my impression is, I've never been to Iraq, and I've never been to Afghanistan, but my impression is that the war in Afghanistan was basically fought, on the countryside, on a mountain somewhere, while in Iraq there were like war in the cities. while in Afghanistan you were very lonely. What happened next? Where were you stationed in Afghanistan?
Absolutely. So we from Bagram we ended up going to a place called Sharana, and the main fob there was called Fob Sharana. It was the Paktika province. It was right on the border of Pakistan, essentially. Um, and compared to Iraq, our AO was huge. The area of operations. Um, we ended up having to split our whole regiment up and send all the different companies to different areas for them to essentially control themselves. Um, to get anywhere, you'd have to, you know, drive really far. Essentially, doing on foot operations was just not really feasible based off of how large of an area that we had to cover. Um, we would do air assaults from time to time where, they'd fly us in and we do dismounted patrols. But for the most part, all of our patrols were mounted, just based on how far everything was in that country, or at
Yeah.
least that area.
Can you describe, the people in Afghanistan basically? Because when I think about Afghanistan, I think about villages, poor people, men with beards and things like that. Can you explain yeah, basically the environment in Afghanistan?
Yeah, so there was a little town outside of our main fob, and there's definitely um, a lot of poor, farming type people out there. And um, but with that being said, they were the nicest people, in the world. Um, like they would always, whenever we would drive by our convoys, they would um they would have this guy that would bring us bread, like homemade bread. He wouldn't charge us anything, but we would every now and then we give him some stuff, but he'd always have bread ready for us. And um they're really really great people. There are certain areas where they're a little standoffish, but the areas closest to the U.S. bases, the people there were fantastic. I've also did a couple. Um, we worked really closely with the Afghan army and the Afghan police, and they were also really great people. Um, really really brave, because we're driving around in these huge up armored vehicles, and they're driving around like madmen on these little sheet metal little trucks. Um, but yeah, they're really brave, really great people. That some of them, I was talking with a guy who, um, going back to the U.S. involvement and stuff. He told me that he hoped that the U.S. would never leave, because um, he was worried that the Taliban would essentially come after him and his family once the U.S. protection was gone, because he was working with us. I was doing tower guard with him, actually. Um, so
Yeah.
y-
Yeah, that's
yeah.
that's that's very interesting, and we're gonna go deeper into this in a while. But was your mission was basically to defend the villages against the Taliban? Is that correct?
Right. So yeah, we would defend villages, and also one of the things we would do is we'd build bridges, we would build schools, we'd hand out school supplies, um, we do all kinds of humanitarian type stuff, um, which I like doing that kind of stuff. It kind of gave me this sense of you know what we were doing. As we were helping these people. Um, we also, one of the major events that happened when we were there was um, the one of the first elections. Um, so we it was this massive effort to make sure that the elections were safe um, and free, so that people weren't scared to come out and vote. Um, so that was definitely huge, and that gave me an appreciation for the elections here. We don't have to have a up armored vehicle with a 50 cal guarding your election site because you're worried about terrorists coming in and detonating a suicide vest.
Yeah.
Because for as much as the Taliban would want to come after U.S. forces, it wasn't just us that they were going after. And a lot of the times it was the civilian populace that they would attack.
Oh,
Um, so it definitely wasn't just U.S. versus Taliban. It was Taliban trying to maintain their backwards sort of control, views on control and stuff over the Afghan people, and that manifested in them blowing up markets. It wasn't just us that they were after.
very interesting. But one question then is, most you have described now some of the Afghans you met. Most of the Afghans you met, were they grateful that the Americans had driven out the Talibans?
Oh, absolutely. They were very grateful for everything that we did while we were there. They were grateful for the training. They were grateful for the protection. Um, at least from the people that I talked to. And then you have some that ended up being interpreters for U.S. forces and ended up getting citizenship from that, or at least green cards, and to become a citizen. Um, so I still talk to one of our interpreters, um, who was an Afghan national at the time, um, and he's nicest guy in the world.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but he was very grateful for everything we did and everything we were doing, um, and I think the sentiment was essentially the same uh, for the majority of the people.
Very interesting. One thing when you follow the war through the news media and things like that, then there was a big contrast. That one of the things that America really did good was that you built schools for girls especially, and that women became free to walk on the streets and to have to be able to participate in politics and be out in public and things like that. Did you see did people talk about the difference for women in Afghanistan, thanks to the Americans?
I didn't really hear anything from any of the locals about that. But I've seen what you're talking about, and you know that's definitely um, one of the great things that I think has come out of that, or at least our involvement there, because naturally, just in general when it comes to Middle East, women's rights is definitely an area that uh, is really really tragic in a lot of places. So any chance you get to improve that situation, um, is a great undertaking. So
Yeah. Uh,
um,
One other thing that politicians back then spoke a lot about, George W. Bush and Barack Obama also, was that the strategy would be to win the heart and minds of the Afghans, and that was one of the missions of for the U.S. soldiers. Was that a strategy that you was that how did you implement that strategy, and do you think it succeeded?
I think so. Yeah, there's always that whole hearts and minds thing. You always want to treat the civilian population with as much respect as you can. We would always hand out candy to the kids. We'd bring them soccer balls. We would bring them. They loved to get pens and pencils. Just simple things like that. They loved having. Even beyond like the big things, like it's one thing to say, hey, we're going to build this school, but there's also the little things like handing out you know It's just simple little pencils, and stuff like that. You know, it's those little things that, you know, when you're in such a poor country, um, when you're coming in there and you're helping improve their lives, even with something as simple as that. I think it goes a long ways in the hearts and minds sort of department there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
You know, here in Sweden, you know, I'm a very big fan and a friend of the United States military. I love the US Army, and, you know, I think that you do great things, and, you know, you are awesome. But most of my friends here in Sweden, they are very anti-American. And the news here in Sweden, basically about the war in Afghanistan, was that Americans were there and they killed civilians and things like that. And I assume also that there are both good and bad apples among the soldiers. Can you elaborate on that? You know, on good versus bad soldiers and their behavior and things like that?
so I mean, yeah, they're you know, war, inevitably a consequence of that is collateral damage and civilian deaths. But you know, the U.S. Um, has a lot of safeguards in place that really, at least from what I saw, um, that didn't really leave a whole lot of room for U.S. soldiers to just, you know, go out and mistreat people. You know, like it just wasn't that sort of environment. At least the area, you know, the people I was around. Um, I don't see how you could get away with with you know, just flat out murdering civilians, or even treating them poorly. You know, there's always, your command always had a open door policy, essentially, that if you saw something that wasn't right, you would be able to go and you'd be able to talk to, um, you know, as high up as you want, essentially. Um, so there's a lot of, you know, policing ourselves and making sure that, um, you're not only holding yourself accountable to do the right thing, but also making sure that your buddies are also doing the right thing. You know,
Yeah.
I don't think anyone really goes over there and intends to just, you know, murder civilians or anything like that. Um,
So that was
which
not that was not a common problem then. That was basically like the media in the West, basically the left-wing media or something.
Absolutely,
All right.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know, there might be, you know, an incident here and there where you get some, you know, I think there was like a special forces guy who maybe went a little overboard. Um, I don't know the full story on that, but, like, you know, there's going to be isolated incidents, and that's kind of the problem with the media is they'll take like an isolated incident, and then they'll they'll kind of make that the face of the
Yeah.
entire, um, you know, army or whatever. When it's not that's not the case at all. You know, you can't stop every single thing from bad thing from happening. You know, there's going to be people who just snap, I guess, but, for the most part, um, that wasn't really a big issue.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, interesting. Well, okay. The next question is, you know, did you experience any combats? We spoke about, you know, the combats experiences in Iraq. What did you experience in Afghanistan in that regard?
yeah, so there was definitely, combat, um, in Afghanistan, um, very similar to Iraq, where you never really knew where it was going to come from. Um, you know, IEDs were a huge problem, uh, just because of how large our area was and the fact that we had to drive everywhere. Um, I was personally, involved in two IED strikes. Um, I got a Purple Heart from the first IED strike that I was in. Um, and then there's just a couple others that, you know, the truck in front of me got blown up, or behind me, or, um, they would then ambush you, and you never really knew where things were going to come from. So yeah, it was definitely uh, pretty heated. It got to the point where we started out when we were over there. We were driving around in Humvees originally, but um, the IEDs were getting just so big that even the up armored Humvees weren't enough to handle that. So they ended up making us switch over and exclusively ride out in nothing but the MRAPs and the bomb proof trucks, essentially, just because of how huge the IEDs were.
Yeah.
Um,
Did you have any friends that died in Afghanistan?
yeah, we lost a few people um, while we were the while we were over there. There's one I knew personally. It's kind of rough to talk about it sometimes, but yeah, we definitely lost some people. Um, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You said earlier that, in Iraq there was the war in Iraq was basically against Al Qaeda in Iraq, and the war in Afghanistan was basically against the Taliban. Was there any difference, between the Taliban and Al Qaeda in Iraq in their strategies and their tactics, in their their thinking, their ideology, and things like that? What was the difference in that regard?
So I didn't really notice a huge difference, but one of the things I would say is a big difference between Iraq and Afghanistan, or at least the area that I was in Afghanistan, is the Taliban um, had Pakistan to rely on. So what they would do is um, they would come over into our area of operations, and they'd start trouble, and then they'd go over the border to Pakistan, and then that's where they would sort of base themselves. Because trying to, for the U.S., we invaded Afghanistan, not Pakistan, right?
Yeah.
So if you're all of a sudden dropping mortars or artillery or dropping guided missiles over into Pakistan, well, that's a huge problem.
Yeah.
And the Taliban knows that, and they incorporate that into their strategy. So they'd fire missiles from Pakistan into Afghanistan. They route all their supplies through Pakistan, and the Pakistani military, you can't you can only trust them so much, So it's kind of like that was the big thing we had to deal with, essentially. Um,
Would you say that the Afghan army, which is far from perfect, but were they more reliable towards the Americans than the Pakistani army?
yeah, I would say the Afghan army was more reliable, but I didn't have a whole lot of interaction with the Pakistani military, so I, I can't really say for sure. Um, but I would say, to contrast the Afghani military with the Iraqi military, um, I think I would personally trust the Afghani one over the Iraqi one, but that just could have been um, a function of the time, Uh, so I don't really know.
Yeah. So what did you feel when Barack Obama made announced basically that the United States had killed Osama bin Laden, the brain behind the 9/11 attack?
Yeah, that was a huge. That was it was a great. That was the whole reason for invading Afghanistan, right?
Yeah.
We wanted to get Osama, and we got him.
Yeah.
That was like a huge day. It was very very exciting news. Um, it was a great thing to hear for sure.
Were you celebrating on the base then? Because you were deployed in Afghanistan at that moment, right?
Yeah, I think I was deployed at the time, right? It was in 2009. Yeah.
And
Uh,
it was 2011 he died.
Oh, okay. No. Then I was back home then. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's. Yeah. I remember hearing the news and being just very, very excited um about that because you go to Afghanistan. When I saw 9/11 happen, as a kid, and when I joined the military, you always have that in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
And you hear you're going to Afghanistan where everything sort of started, and then you get home, and it's just good to sort of have that closure, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, to finally know that we got the guy we were looking for.
Yeah, exactly. We were talking earlier about, American soldiers and behavior and things like that. And one person that, basically made the news a lot was Ronie Berggren. And that was a soldier in Afghanistan who, most soldiers I speak to, they said that he betrayed his friends. And, can you talk a little bit about him, what he did and your feelings and thoughts about him?
Yeah. So the man that situation, let me tell you, that was a very, very interesting time. I remember when this first happened, we were out doing route overwatch, and I actually had the battalion commander with me at the time because there's this huge, huge undertaking we were doing. I think we were building a base for the Afghani military or something like that, and it was like just this huge operation. And I remember, that morning we were out for um, I think 4 or 5 days at that time. And then we all of a sudden we got the dust one over the radio, which is duty status whereabouts unknown. That means a U.S. soldier has gone missing. So from there we essentially stopped what we were doing and immediately took off to the base, the little outpost that Bergdahl had walked away from. And we immediately started search efforts. Pretty much every asset that was available in the area all came to our AO. We were running, nonstop essentially trying to find this kid. Um, and we didn't understand why he did it. We knew a little bit about what happened because he didn't even take his rifle. He just took he took, I think, his notebook, some water, and I think a knife or something.
And
We
basically
didn't
walked
know
off the
why.
base.
Right, right. We
Yeah.
knew he didn't get kidnapped because he he took things like he was intentionally gonna leave. Essentially there was no sign of a struggle that would indicate that he was taken. It was definitely indications that he had left on his own volition, um, which definitely uh, made a lot of us angry because one of the the core fundamental um, fundamental properties of being a soldier is that you got your brother's back, and for him to be on guard and then just dip out in the middle of the night, that's like, you don't do that. You essentially betrayed everyone in your platoon, um, by deserting them essentially.
Yeah.
Um, it's like trying, it's like he divided by zero. It's like you just don't do that. So it definitely made a lot of us very, very angry. And as it went on, as the missions um, became more and more nonstop, um, as things dragged on, it just we got even more angry at him.
Did his
Um,
behavior put you like in harm's way when you were looking for him?
yeah, so it definitely put everyone in harm's way. Just based off the simple fact that we were doing nonstop missions, essentially. I had gotten um, blown up, I think, shortly after he had left. I don't think it was related to him leaving, but I avoided most of the nonstop operations because I was recovering from my IED strike that I was in. But um, as I was recovering, I was placed in the command center essentially. So I got a huge overview of everything that was going on, and the amount of assets that we had um, coming to us on a nonstop basis, the amount of patrols that everyone was doing. It definitely put everyone in our battalion in harm's way unnecessarily. And to even go a step further, it took away assets from other um, forces, that needed it. Because,
Hmm.
we would have, soldiers up in, the north of us that didn't get, XYZ helicopter or this reconnaissance predator drone because it got diverted to help us in our search effort. For as much as he betrayed us, in disappearing and walking out on us, well, the other big tenet is that you don't leave anyone behind. So
Yeah.
even though he didn't he kind of backstabbed us, we weren't going to do the same. We were, even though he did what he did, we were still going to do our damnedest to try to find him,
Yeah.
um, come hell or high water.
Yeah, yes, indeed, yeah. But a couple of years later, then Barack Obama, the president, he announced that, because what happened was that Bergdahl actually got caught by the Taliban and he became a prisoner. He was not kidnapped at the beginning, but eventually they found him and well, thought that wow, this is an American soldier. We can use him as a prisoner and negotiate with him. So they took him as a prisoner and they demanded that the United States government released I don't know how many, but this and that Taliban. And Barack Obama, basically said yes. So he traded these terrorists for Bovie Bergdahl. And when Bovie Bergdahl came home to the United States, I think he, together with his father, held a press conference. They became famous and things like that. What did you soldiers think and feel when you watched him on the news?
Yeah. So originally it kind of got the feeling that the Obama administration had sort of try to make it seem like Bergdahl was like, I know they were talking about how he's like a hero and this, that, and the other, but then the truth kind of came out that, oh, wait a second, this guy deserted his guys, so that originally, sort of pissed me off, them trying to control that narrative like that. But, the truth came out eventually and everyone, realized that, he actually needs to be held accountable for what he did. And, that's a big part of this conversation is, you know, we operate on innocent until proven guilty, essentially. So, he needed to have his day in court. He needed to face a military tribunal. We needed to get him home. I know people were, there's a lot of debate on whether, we should have traded the guys, whether we should have talked with, the Taliban. But I mean, we're doing that now. Essentially, we talk with the Taliban all the time now, because we're negotiating ceasefires. They say don't negotiate with terrorists. Well, that's sort of kind of gone out the window in recent years, just because you gotta we're withdrawing. We're trying to broker peace and everything. So, yeah, it sucks. We had to give up five guys for him. But on the other hand, it's good that we got him home and he was able to get face justice.
Yeah.
That was my big thing. I didn't want to see the kid get killed or beheaded or anything like that. Um, you know, like I said, one of the big things about being a soldier is you don't leave anyone behind. So the idea that we got him back, was a good thing as far as I was concerned. Um, he wasn't a hero though. He betrayed us. He was a deserter. He definitely needed to be tried, and I'm glad that he, was punished. I think, he probably should have gotten a little bit more punishment. I know he got a dishonorable discharge and, um, this, that, and the other, but, maybe a little jail time would have been nice. But, at this point, it's like, he spent 5 years, basically being tortured or whatever, so, I mean, I don't, I think, he got justice, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh,
so,
yeah.
and as far as the guys that we traded, you know, for those 5 guys, I bet were immediately replaced, when they were captured. So it's like, yeah, we put 5 more terrorists, put 5 terrorists back out there, but it's like, these terrorist organizations, you cut the head off of one snake and 2 more appear. So it's like big picture. What is it? Was it a huge deal? To let those guys go? Um, I don't think so, but you get different opinions on that. Um, at the end of the day, we got Bo back, and we were able to prosecute him and make him answer for what he did. So I think that was worth it.
Yeah. So, if you want to summarize your, the rest of your time in Afghanistan, what happened after that, and when did you go home and things like that?
So we ended up going home in I think I left in February or March of 2010.
Hmm.
So Bergdahl left right before the big election. Um, that was the big main part of us being there, was preparing for that election and training Afghan forces. And that's basically what we did the rest of the time we were there. Is there was a point in time where we had searched for Bergdahl for so long. It was like 45 days, 2 or 3 months. At that point, he's gone. He's in Pakistan. But and so we kind of started getting back to normal operations, even though there's always that sort of secondary um, operation that's always back there in the back of your mind. Keep a lookout for any information regarding Bergdahl's whereabouts,
Yeah.
even though we kind of knew. So things kind of started to get back to normal um, after that, as far as operations went. We finished off our tour. We did. We held the elections. Um, and I think I was talking to the battalion commander, um, years later, um, and he had said that after we were there and we did um, everything we did with helping rebuild that area, helping push the Taliban out. We had that unfortunate incident with Bergdahl and everything, but it sounded like that area became a lot safer um, after we did what we did when we were over there. So it sounds like we had a positive impact overall, um, which that's I hold my head high based on that. So
Yeah. But
because at the end of the day,
yeah.
having a positive impact is the goal, right? So.
Yes, indeed. But at the moment, you mentioned this a moment ago, that at the moment the United States is trying to negotiate with the Taliban, and President Joe Biden, he basically said that this is the longest war in history, and we're gonna leave in September and end this operation. Enduring freedom will definitely end, and all American troops will come home. Uh, what are your thoughts about that? About the United States leaving Afghanistan totally, because you haven't had a big presence the last couple of years, basically. But do you think that things will be, will the Taliban take over? Do you think that all you did will be in vain? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so the past couple of years we've been kind of slowly reducing our presence just in general. I actually saw a interesting piece on YouTube from Vice that went over this exact topic, and you know they were saying that the Afghan military, they wish that we would stay, and help support them some more, but they understand that we've been doing this for way too long. You gotta sort of sink or swim, um, with the Afghan army and the Afghan police. Um, at some point, we can't stay there forever. We've got people who deployed to Afghanistan, had kids, and then now their kid deployed to Afghanistan. It's
Hmm.
like, wow.
Yeah.
um, so it's like you can't get involved in a forever war. There's got to be a time where you say enough is enough. Um, I think we definitely reached that time. I think that the Afghan police and the Afghan military, um, I think that they should be capable of holding back the Taliban. I know Taliban's probably going to make some attempts to try to regain control with the U.S. presence no longer there. Um, absolutely. I mean, I think it'd be silly to think that they wouldn't. Um, One of the things that they had mentioned in that Vice piece was that it's not so much as the U.S. soldiers being on the ground that they're worried about; it's the equipment. You know, the biggest thing for the Afghan military, isn't so much the individual soldier anymore. It's U.S. support in general. It's giving them the tools that they need to be able to fight off the Taliban, and in that sense, um, you know, I want all of our soldiers to come home and everything, but I don't think it would be a bad idea to continue to at least provide support to the Afghan military. That way, they don't get overran by Taliban, or it's one thing to fully withdraw and say enough is enough. Let's get our soldiers home, but it's another thing to cut off support entirely, right?
Yeah.
You want to at least say, okay, we put all this effort in. Let's make sure that the effort that we put in doesn't end up going in vain. Let's make sure that they have the tools that they need to be able to fight back, right?
Yeah.
Now, on the other hand, we saw what happened in Iraq, where we gave the Iraqis all the tools that they needed to fight back, but they just, with ISIS,
Yeah.
that was like the big thing that happened in Iraq is the Iraqi army said we're not going to fight, and the ISIS ended up with all of the U.S. military equipment,
Yeah.
right? And so I don't see that happening in Afghanistan. I think the Afghan army, um, and the Afghan police are a lot better situated to be able to resist the Taliban. Um, and I think providing them support with equipment, not so much personnel. Um, I think that's the way we should go.
That's very interesting. I have a couple of final questions, and that is about the veterans, the soldiers like you who served and then came back home. A lot of them were killed, but a lot of them were also injured. And how has the treatment of veterans from Afghanistan and also from Iraq been upon the return home?
So the as far as treatment of veterans and soldiers, it's like it's been fantastic. Even if people don't necessarily agree with the war, they never agree with the war to begin with. They always view soldiers in a positive light. At least the majority of people. There's always going to be some that are just anti everything, but there's nothing you can do about those people. But the overwhelming majority has been very positive. If anything, I think they kind of maybe put veterans on a pedestal a little bit too much.
Okay.
uh, but it's been great. The VA, there's definitely been um, problems in the past, when you get involved in two extremely long wars like we were involved in, and the VA wasn't really set up to be able to handle that. I think that's settled out now, especially since we pulled out essentially. Or I think the VA has come a long way in providing treatment and stuff. I use the VA all the time. Uh, I basically use that exclusively for my treatment. I've always had a positive experience with the VA. Um, I got a disability rating with them, and they've basically given me free healthcare. Anytime I have a problem, I just do a walk-in and they take me. Um, so I've got a lot of positive experiences with the VA, and not very many negatives, I would say. There's there's a little bit of back and forth with um, as far as like the opinion on how the VA should be ran, whether it should be privatized, whether the government should handle it,
Yeah.
and definitely see that flow down sometimes. As far as like budgeting goes, like um, they'll try to like y- y- push the point forward that the VA is inefficient and it needs to go to private sector. It you get different. Um, the VA runs a little different just depending on who's in charge at the time. But in general, everyone at the VA has been great. The um, the veteran service officers that help with disability claims, they've been great. Um, yeah, there's a lot of resources out there for veterans. The GI Bill was huge in helping me get through college. In fact, my GI Bill ran out, and I ended up qualifying for a um, they call it voc rehab. It's like vocational rehab. So if you have a disability rating, you essentially get all of the benefits from the GI Bill just extended until you graduate. So um, there's just so many great things out there for veterans, which a lot that's definitely something new. Uh, you know, Even as far back, as close as the Gulf War, like veterans have definitely been on the receiving end of a lot of benefits in recent years, a lot of benefits, which I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, two more questions. One on the same subject, basically. Mental health, that is a very big issue among veterans, and I assume that back during the Vietnam era, you did not think about things like that, like mental health and PTSD and things like that. Is that something that the military takes and the VA and things like that take serious today, in comparison to like earlier generations?
Yeah. So um, when I was in the Army, they were still kind of doing the whole mental health thing. It's kind of like a stigma type thing, where they're look down on you for going to mental health. But from my understanding in recent years, I didn't see it because I had gotten out. Um, from what I hear, the Army's gotten a lot better about reducing that stigma as far as mental health goes. Um, the VA, they're okay when it comes to mental health. Like I said, a lot of my rating with the VA is based off of mental health.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things that is kind of challenging when it comes to the VA is, they are very well equipped to help soldiers with, PTSD, but like they the problem with that I've experienced with the VA is, that's essentially all they want to talk about is like PTSD. It's like, they don't have a lot of, I wish they would be more broader in their mental health approach,
Yeah.
um, because it's just like, there's more than just PTSD that's out there, bothering people. Even though the PTSD program, is great, um, there's always room for improvement.
Yeah,
Uh,
indeed. Yes, yeah. Okay, my final question is basically you've been basically talking about this a little bit, but America today is very polarized between Republicans and Democrats, and between liberals and conservatives, and at least when you when you watch from abroad the news, like riots on the streets in Portland, and Black Lives Matter on one side, and conservatives on the other side, and things like that. So it looks very polarized. But you said that. Most Americans were united behind behind the soldiers, behind the troops, support our troops, even though they might disagree about the politics, about the war, and to fight the war or not. They still supported the soldiers. Do you have any thoughts about the polarization today in the United States, and how to end it basically?
Phew, that's a tough one.
Yeah,
um,
I don't
yeah,
expect the full answer.
yeah. So we're more polarized than ever before. They, it seems like today, if one side takes up an issue, the other side will just be the opposite opinion of it, just based on principle.
Yeah.
You know, if I came out as a Republican or a Democrat and I said, "Man, it's really great that it's warm today," well, the other side would come out and be like, "No, it's better when it's cold." Just for the sake of having that tribalism. That's the big problem here is how tribal the back and forth is. I think if we got away from the tribalism, um, we would realize that we all have a lot more in common than we think. Um,
But do you think that the public could learn from the military? Because I assume that as a soldier, when you are like in the combat situation, you don't care if your friend is a Republican or a Democrat. You know that we are a team, we are together, we are like from the same nation, and that's the only thing that matters. I assume that is how soldiers think in like in desperate situations. Do you think that, yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but is that something that the public could learn from?
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. When you're deployed and it doesn't matter whether the guy next to you is a Republican or a Democrat or what the color of his skin, his religion. It doesn't matter. The only thing that matters at that point in time is that you have each other's back and that um, you want to get your buddy home safely and he wants to get you home safely. And I think boiling it down to it sounds basic, but like you said, there's a lot more that we have in common than what divides us. And I think if we took things, from a more simpler perspective and we stopped making every little thing an argument, um, we would realize that, we don't need to be at each other's throats over, little differences. It doesn't matter. They, as much as they want to put soldiers on a pedestal, like I said, they really should, like you were saying, take a look and use us as an example on how to push through some of these polarizing um, issues,
Yeah.
and look past that.
Yeah. Well, okay, and that's all my questions. So I want to say, thanks a lot, Chris Reiff, for this very interesting interview, and I want to thank you for your service, and I wish you all the best in your your future career.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was great talking to you. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.